Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. Re-bienvenue tout le monde. Ça me fait plaisir de présenter notre suivant conférencier d'honneur. Notre suivant conférencier d'honneur, malheureusement, il ne pouvait pas nous joindre en personne aujourd'hui, mais on est très content de lui recevoir par conférence vidéo. It is my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, who unfortunately couldn't be here in person today, but we are very happy to receive him by video conference. Join me in a warm welcome for Kevin Outterson, law professor from the Boston University School of Law. Welcome back, everybody.
Kevin, you can start from part 2.
All right. So thank you for your patience. It's always a risk with technology. Let's talk about why the antibiotic market is broken. For a company thinking about making an investment, they have to invest money in the preclinical phase, and then phase 1 trials, then phase 2 trials, and phase 3 trials, and then finally the new drug application, or the BLA, the vaccine or large molecule application. Each of these steps takes time. Each of these steps takes money, and in each step there's a chance of success or failure. This is work that our group did for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to try to decide to model what is the expected net present value from the company's perspective of an investment at any given moment along this chain. And so the results are on the next slide. The private net present value for the companies for these 6 indications that were given to us by the FDA, for 2 of them, they're negative. Put another way, for Hep VAP and for earache, actually the companies, if they're successful in bringing a molecule to market, are going to lose money. And even the best of these, community-acquired bacterial pneumonia, the total expected net present value for the company was $37 million. In other words, you invest several hundred million for a decade, and you're successful in getting the drug to market, the return is just fairly small. So this is similar data, but not looking at what it is for the company, but instead thinking what is it worth for society. Again, this is by the Eastern Research Group for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in 2014. And the error bars are large, but you can see that the value to society for a new effective drug for hospital-acquired bacterial pneumonia is huge. Here we show something in the range of $12 billion is the point estimate, and the range would go all the way up to $160 billion. So the social value of these drugs is high. The private value to companies is quite low. This next chart shows you the difference. So on the chart, the red bars are the social, and the blue bars are the private. And you might say that there's a technical problem, but actually the blue bars are represented on this chart. They're just so small that you can't see them unless I made the chart huge. This is U.S. data on total sales of antibiotics by dollar sales in the United States, and adjusted for inflation. And you can see that antibiotics, the peak sales were in 2005. Put another way, for the companies, this is not a growing market. Part of that reason why it's not growing is that we do all sorts of effective things on infection control, and we're trying to be careful with stewardship of antibiotics. We don't want to waste them. All of those are excellent ideas for public health. For the company's perspective, it makes the market less appealing. Will it get any better soon? I'm a pessimist on this. This is a slide from Stephen Hoffman, work that I did with Stephen Hoffman. And you may have seen it already before in this conference, but the thought that all 3 of these things have to go together. And so if we're talking about innovation, but we don't have access to these drugs to the people around the world who are dying from susceptible and resistant infections, then we've done a great injustice. And if we bring new drugs to the market but don't conserve them, then we're just wasting this scientific innovation. Likewise, if all we do is conserve drugs, we'll make the ones we have today last longer, but we certainly won't do anything to encourage new ones to be created. And likewise with access, you can read the difficulties we show on the slide. So let's talk a little bit about this in the context of one of the top 3 pathogens on the US CDC urgent threat list, which is CRE, gram-negative bacteria. So in Sweden, the Swedes are good at counting things like this. They've tracked every case of CRE in the country since 2007. 24 clinical infections, and only one of those had to use the last-ditch antibiotic, colistin. Put another way, in Sweden, 9 million people, if you had a perfect drug which went after CRE, you might only have 24 cases over 7 years. But actually, all of those cases are susceptible to at least 2 antibiotics, except for one, which is susceptible only to 1 antibiotic, and colistin is generic and quite cheap. So what is the market value of a CRE drug in Sweden? 0. What is it worth to Sweden to have a drug on the shelf, behind glass perhaps, ready should a CRE outbreak occur? That might be worth hundreds of millions of dollars as an insurance policy. But as a drug that's sold through normal markets, it has no value whatsoever. This is based on a paper, it actually should say 2016, which has been accepted at the Lancet Infectious Diseases, but is not yet published. The CDC in the United States, because we talked a little bit about Sweden, they estimate 9,000 cases of CRE in 2011. They want to reduce that by 60% through aggressive measures. If you have the same pattern as in Sweden, there's about 250 cases in the U.S., which are susceptible only to colistin. Now, put another way, what's the market for a CRE drug, even in the United States? It's exceptionally small at present. If you looked at other diseases for which drug developers should be developing drugs, C. difficile or multi-drug resistant Pseudomonas and these others, the CDC is trying hard through the National Action Plan to reduce the incidence of these diseases. Put another way, the government is working overtime to reduce the market size for your drug. You can imagine in any other categories doing excellent work in public health, and the result of it would be to cut your market like a cancer drug or something against Alzheimer's. So this is the bottom line. The number of cases are going to go down because infection control is being effective. The volume per case may decline because we're being more efficient in the use of antibiotics. It's a shrinking, unattractive market to the companies. So this answers the question, do I think it'll get better soon? I think not. So let's talk about how the law interposes, and I've got about 3 more minutes left, I believe. So we had a major process at Chatham House over the past couple of years in London, thinking about how we should respond to this crisis in an integrated fashion that looks at all 3 legs of that tripod: access, innovation, and conservation. And we came up with this. In the preclinical phases, things like NIH grants or medical research grants or things from Wellcome Trust, we have very broad standards and we need more money in this area. It requires funding for grants from science bodies, not so much a change in law. In the middle phases and clinical phases, the Orphan Drug Act and the tax credits associated with that are looked at as a model. And that would require change because the Orphan Drug Act has not been applied to antibiotics for various technical reasons. But these types of tax credits would encourage the companies to develop an antibiotic that qualifies for the credit. The PPP contracts is a public-private partnership. In Europe, that would be the Innovative Medicines Initiative, IMI, and all the projects that they're doing in antibiotics, combining company work and company effort with the government. In the United States, the best example of PPP in antibiotics would be BARDA, which is an agency of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. By standards, I mean that we need to focus on the highest priority threats. We can't afford to pay for everything, all sorts of research. We want to focus on the things that have the highest threat to human health, as determined by our transparent threat assessment. The bottom at the end, at post-registration, delinkage based on a threat assessment. Here's what delinkage is. Currently, we pay for antibiotics based on volume. So it's the volume that we sell times the price. For antibiotics, we have a unique reason not to pay based on volume. We're trying to reduce volume, not increase it. We should be paying for antibiotics based on their value to society instead of the volume of the drug sold. We don't want to give companies an incentive to oversell them. And sometimes, as in the case with CRE, the companies deserve a reward even if the sales in this year is 0. And so a lot of work has been done, and the Chatham House report and several others like it including the AMR review by Lord Jim O'Neill in England, are thinking about various ways to reward the companies after registration of the project with the FDA or the EMA, ways that have nothing to do with the volume of the drug, but talk instead about the value of the drug. My last slide is to look at all the different actors, institutional actors, and legal mechanisms that are being discussed right now. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just focus on the ones in the box. In the U.S., there's a national group called the PACCARB, the Presidential Advisory Council on Combating Antimicrobially Resistant Bacteria, PACCARB, which is a high level led by cabinet officers, effort to try to focus the U.S. government's efforts in these areas. In Europe, you have Drive AB, which is part of what I mentioned before, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, IMI. You have the O'Neill Commission in England, been appointed by the English Prime Minister. And then you have the Longitude Prize, which is £10 million of money from the British people for a prize for a rapid point-of-care diagnostic to reduce antibiotic resistance. These are important efforts, and these folks are talking to one another. There's coordination going on, both formally and informally. Finally, the G7, the health ministers meeting in Germany this last fall, the G20 chaired by China in the upcoming year, and all the activities of the WHO are looking at what sort of structures, what type of legal structures or something short of treaties do we need, could we do, in order to address this problem on a global basis. And I know that you have other speakers that go into some of those details, some of those issues in greater detail. So with that, I conclude, and again, apologies for the technical difficulties.
Are we taking time for questions? Are we ready to break for lunch? There's a question at the back. Can you hear us, Dr. Outterson?
Oh. Kevin, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Kevin, can you hear me? It's Stephen Hoffman.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Okay, so let me ask maybe the first question. What, you're part of many committees and commissions advising the U.S. government and the U.K. government on these issues. What kind of prospects for change do you anticipate over the, let's say, the short or medium term, 2 to 5 years? Are we? I mean, of course, the landscape. In my presentation at the beginning, I reviewed a bit about how over the last couple of years we've seen a lot of change and reason for some optimism. But maybe if you could speak to, based on your inside views and networks, what would be the prospects that we might actually get some real change in the next 2 to 5 years? Thanks, Kevin.
So one of the organizations that's been at this issue in the United States for more than 3 decades is the Alliance for the Prudent Use of Antibiotics, led by Stuart Levy and Dr. Tom O'Brien. And they're both, very senior clinicians at this point. They've been at this for 3 or 4 decades. Many of those years toiling with trying to get anyone's attention on this issue. We have in the past 3 or 4 years an unprecedented amount of political attention and energy and mobilization on this issue. We have, in the United States, for the first time ever, the President of the United States mentioned antibiotic resistance in a State of the Union address, then issued an executive order, and then corralled this Congress into passing now cumulatively more than several $100 million of additional money to combat antibiotic resistance. For President Obama to be able to do that with this Congress is nothing short of a miracle. In Europe, again, the G7, one of 3 issues that they took up at the health ministers meeting was antibiotic resistance. The Prime Minister of England taking a personal interest in this. The companies of all the drug companies at Davos, at the World Economic Forum just last month. I've never been to Davos. I've never been to the World Economic Forum. It's not the sort of place that radicals and revolutionaries get in. It's the capitalist elite who are there. And the companies, last month, the drug companies issued a statement which is nothing short of revolutionary, calling for a complete change in the way that we reimburse for antibiotics. These aren't pitchfork-carrying radicals. These are the companies themselves. So I'm something of an optimist, or I put it this way. We have unprecedented amounts of energy mobilization and political attention at the top. If we can't get anything done in this environment, then shame on us.
Kind of question.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gail Grew, and I just had a question with regards to the role that Canada plays in addressing the issue of antimicrobial resistance, and what is something that Canada can do to try and address this issue. Is there anything like special about Canada that it could in particular address?
There are so many things that are special about Canada. So, Canada is a member of both the G7 and the G20. So, Canadian leadership on this technical issue is important. Canada has a fair amount of developmental assistance into countries which need better laboratories and better surveillance and the ability to begin, their own path towards stronger antimicrobial stewardship. So the Canadian development effort, I think, is important. And I think that Canadian science, there's a lot of tasks that could be done in terms of resistance research, and I think that a country like Canada could pick a topic or two, and really be a world leader on it, because honestly, the amount of research work that's gone into other pathogens, antivirals, antiretrovirals, parasites, viruses has been huge. For bacteria, it's been relatively underfunded for the past several decades. So there's a lot of opportunities. Not for everything, but for a couple of areas. So I was talking to some Canadian folks in the government not long ago, and one thought was this concept of repurposing, taking drugs that are already approved but have never been tested as an antibiotic in specific circumstances. That's the sort of discrete task that a country or a group of countries could take on and could make a tremendous difference.
Hi, my name is Natalie Brinder. I work with Genome Canada. I wonder if you could give an assessment of where the global effort on the agricultural front stands in comparison with effort on the human medical front. Just a brief overview. Is there a comparatively robust effort going on to reduce antibiotic use in animals and crops? And any thoughts would be appreciated.
This is a great question. So the something on the order of 70 or 80% of the global amount of antibiotics produced on the planet are used in the agricultural or non-human sector. A large amount of that goes into meat production, particularly pigs and chickens, but also other meat production, as well as other agricultural use. Fish farming is a major user, and then other uses that are not directly agricultural. So the chance for research in this area, there's a lot of work that could be done. I'll give you one example. The salmon fishing industry in Norway used to use a lot of antibiotics, and it got so bad because of the diseases in the ponds and the fjords that it was estimated that up to a pound of antibiotic was used per pound of actual salmon harvested and sold to a consumer. So that's just a horrible statistic. The Norwegians worked on a vaccine, and now every farm-raised salmon in Norway is vaccinated when they're just a little minnow or something. And as a result, antibiotic use in Norwegian farmed salmon is dramatically lower. Okay, so we absolutely need to reduce the use of antibiotics in farm animals, in food production, and vaccines and other improvements to husbandry practices could have an amazing effect The United States has just barely begun releasing research money into this area of the USDA. Out of the 15 members on the U.S. Presidential Council, 5 are from the agricultural industry, signaling that it's recognized as a major issue. It's going to be difficult to just regulate this practice because, on global projections, most of the global increase in antibiotic use over the next 15 years is projected to occur in agriculture in China and Brazil. And, Canada and the United States, other governments have very limited to no ability to control what happens in those agricultural sectors. It requires research that will make it easier for those farmers to do more responsible practices that could be tremendously valuable globally. There's one other idea I want to put out there, which is put up by a Canadian economist, Aidan Hollis. I don't know if Aidan is actually at this conference. If so, I'm giving a shout out. He published an article in the New England Journal with the co-author in 2013, New England Journal of Medicine, calling for a user fee in antibiotics across all animal use, using that money then to promote new research and development or other good uses. A small user fee, something like $25 per kilogram, would increase the cost of the wasteful use of antibiotics, using it as growth promoters and whatnot, but still it would be an amazingly inexpensive drug for treating a sick animal. And that might have the effect of driving out these low-value uses in agriculture without interposing a strict regulatory regime. The price would go up, farmers would still have a choice, but they would choose to use it only when they had a sick animal, not when they're treating the entire flock or herd.
Kevin, Dave Patrick from University of British Columbia, thanks very much for the talk. I wonder if you could go a little bit further into the trade things, and this actually was a question I wanted to throw at Stephen as well when he was talking this morning about global things. It's true that it's hard for us to influence Brazil and Chinese production, and yet I was struck by how motivating it was for Canada when the FDA made a switch against growth promotion, and also while we're negotiating with Europe about access to European markets. To what extent do large trading blocs like NAFTA and the EU have a lot of leverage on producers both within their borders and outside of them if we require reduced utilization of antimicrobials in food production?
So there's a key distinction here on trade policy. If there are antibiotics or antibiotic-resistant bacteria on the meat itself, it's very easy for a country to control those imports. The U.S. or Canada could easily block or put safety measures on Chinese pork coming in if there was antibiotic residue on the meat or resistant bacteria on the meat or any sort of bacteria on the meat. What you cannot do under WTO rules is to affect the process by which farmers raise the meat if it doesn't change the product. So this is the growth hormone and GMO cases that the U.S. and Europe have fought over the decades. And, Europe tried to ban U.S., crops and U.S. food that had been either grown with genetically modified organisms or that had beef hormones that had been, given to the animals. And there wasn't a residue problem. There wasn't anything wrong with the meat or the products. It was just Europe disagreeing with the process by which we'd grown it. WTO has shot down most of those process cases. So if we're able to show that Chinese or Brazilian agriculture results in a product which is different, that's easy. If it's just that the process damages the global ecology of antibiotic resistance, it's very difficult. What we need instead is for those governments, the Brazilians, the Chinese, and everyone else, all of the countries, but led by the G20, for them, for their own internal reasons, to decide that they want to do this. So for China, now with the colistin-resistant gene circulating, clearly coming out of a pig farming, origin, the Chinese government is well aware of the science of this and the potential implications for its country. There's a chance for a win-win solution where it would be difficult, I think, to impose this through trade policy directly.
Thank you. I believe that concludes our questions. Please join me for one last round of applause for Dr. Outterson. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. We will now break for lunch and reconvene at 1:30. Lunch is courtesy of La Bottega.